It's a great honor and a privilege to introduce Rene Moss. We're here in Netanya, and in 2 days' time, we're going to be having the Holocaust Memorial Day. And Rene, you were one of the Kindertransport. So if you could just mention to our listeners, where were you born and when were you born?
I was born in Freiburg in the Black Forest in Germany. That was in 1937. I was the youngest of 4 children. I had 2 sisters. One was 2 years older, one was 4 years older, and my brother was 5.5 years older than I was. And we lived a normal life in Germany, although by the time I was born, obviously there were many signs of Nazism by then. My father was a huge optimist, and he was very proud of being German. Actually, he didn't have German citizenship, because to have German citizenship, you had to be born in Germany, which he was. He was born in Berlin. But his parents had also to be born in Germany, which they were not. They were born in Poland. So therefore, the whole family had Polish citizenship.
And your mother, where was your mother from?
My mother was born in Switzerland. And Switzerland is very near to the Black Forest in Germany. It's across the border. In October of 1939, Poland issued a decree whereby any Polish citizen who hadn't been in Poland for the past 5 years, who hadn't lived in Poland, would no longer be eligible to be called a Polish citizen. So Germany realized that they were going to be stuck with, I think there were about 15,000 Polish Jews living in Germany. And if Poland weren't going to take them back, then Germany were going to have these citizens, and they didn't want them. So overnight, my father, together with many other Polish Jewish men, were taken to prison. And a couple of days later, the whole family had to leave Germany, carrying just what they could carry. Now, my mother was carrying me. I was a baby of 17 months old at the time. My father carried the 3-year-old who, she could walk, but not distances. And then there were the 5-year-old and the nearly 7-year-old. So there wasn't much that could be taken as well as the children. We traveled, we were put on a train, and that train had SS guards on it, and we traveled for 3 days to reach the Polish-German frontier. When we got out at the other end, this is hearsay because obviously as a baby,
you were too young.
I remember nothing. But my brother and my older sister, the 7 and 5-year-old, they remember it clearly. When we arrived at the border, the Poles refused to allow us entry. And so we were sent to Sponsheen. It was a Polish refugee camp. Evidently, it was about 3 or 4 kilometers from the station, and this was in the winter. Snow was on the ground. It was very difficult. When we arrived there, we were given a room to share with another family. I call it a room, it was actually above a hayloft. So those were the conditions. It seems there was one bed. My brother remembers my parents slept at one end and the children slept at the other end. It was a huge camp. It had the most awful conditions there. Food was provided at a soup kitchen. And people were in despair because they had no idea what was going to happen. There were many cases of suicide. Anyway, we were there for 4 months. Actually, in the same camp were the parents of Herschel Greenspan. Not that we knew them, but evidently amongst the refugees from Germany. Herschel Greenspan was the man who, when he heard about his parents' plight in the refugee camp, he was so incensed. He was living in France at the time, and he went to the German embassy there intending to shoot the German ambassador. Actually, he shot someone else, von Rath, his name was, because the ambassador wasn't there at the time. And it was that which actually triggered off Kristallnacht. The Germans used the murder in their German embassy as a sort of pretext for Kristallnacht. So we lived in this refugee camp. There was one occasion where my brother and 5-year-old sister were walking around, and there was a Polish farmer, and he saw that they were from the camp. He called them over through the fence and he gave them a wurst. Anyway, they ran back to my parents. They were very happy to have a wurst. And my mother said, "There is no way we're eating this wurst. It's not a kosher wurst." And threw it away.
So your family was Orthodox?
Orthodox, yes. Traditionally Orthodox, yes. I'm trying to think the sequence of things. So then, after 4 months in the refugee camp, my parents were approached by some authorities from the Kindertransport. Now, the Kindertransport emanated in England, and they actually saved 10,000 children, arranging transports largely by train from various countries: Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia,
and I think Holland as well.
Pardon?
Also Holland.
And Holland, yes, Holland. And they asked my parents, would they be agreeable to let the 3 older children, 3-year-old, 5-year-old, and nearly 7-year-old, come on the Kindertransport. Now, don't forget, today we know what the Kindertransport was, but then people knew nothing about it. We had nobody in England at all. My mother was a linguist. She spoke fluent French, German, Italian, and she had quite a good knowledge of Yiddish, but she knew not a word of English. And we had no connection in England at all. But they thought it's a lifeline for the 3 children, and they must take it, so they agreed to take it. There were many people in the camp who were very critical of that decision of my parents. Yeah, how can you let your 3 children go? But anyway, that's what they decided, and of course it was a very brave decision.
A very difficult decision as well.
Very difficult.
Extremely difficult.
I mean, they had not a clue how life would pan out.
Sure.
Yes. Anyway, the 3 children were taken from the camp with other Jewish children from the camp, taken to Warsaw. In Warsaw, they were there for about 3 weeks, and they were given good food and fresh clothing, and they were cleaned up, deloused and things like that. And that was that.
And what month was this?
This was in February. End of January, beginning of February, 39.
39.
Yes. Anyway, some few weeks after they had gone, my parents were approached again. Kindertransport wanted to save me because a baby, they wanted to save me. And it seems that someone in England had agreed to sponsor me. I've got the original documents actually. I found out in later years who this sponsor was and his family. And actually today I'm in touch with his great grandchild. Yeah. He agreed to sponsor me financially and physically until such time as either I would meet up with my parents or I would reach the age of 18, which was a considerable undertaking.
Was it a Jewish family?
Jewish family. And around the same time as this sponsorship came through, other people in England had agreed to sponsor my parents as domestic servants. That was how grown-ups got sponsored, domestic servants. So because both had sponsorship, the Kindertransport said, okay, so we will take you all, the parents with the child, and there will be room on this ship which is sailing with the Kindertransport. There will be also room for the parents on that same ship. So we then travelled from the camp straight to Gdynia, Polish port. We travelled by train, and as we were travelling, my mother suddenly looked up and she saw my 5-year-old sister walking down the corridor, being led by a 13-year-old girl. She was obviously going perhaps to the bathroom or something like that. Well, can you imagine? I mean, the miracle of seeing, they'd gone three weeks earlier, and we were on the same train.
It's amazing.
Truly amazing. Anyway, so we travelled on this ship. It was an onion ship. My brother tells the story how he showed his sisters where the onions were and how you could throw them into the water. I don't know how popular that was. Anyway, the journey took about a week or just under. My father celebrated. It was his birthday during that trip, and the can't call him a chef. What is he called? The one on a ship, on that kind of a ship. But anyway, the cook evidently made him a birthday cake, which really was quite something. Anyway, we arrived in England, in Cotton Wharf, London, it was a Tuesday, the 15th of February 1939. There were 57 children, including us, and only one complete family, which was us.
Wow.
So the press, the British press, were there to photograph this occasion. And of course, when they saw that there was one complete family, we became the attention of the press. We appeared in many, many newspapers. I've got the cuttings today. And that was it. On arrival in England, we were under the auspices of the Jewish shelter, and soon thereafter the older children were sent, the two girls were kept together and sent to foster parents, and my brother was on his own, sent to different foster parents, and I was sent to an orphanage.
And can I ask, the foster parents, were they Jewish?
No, they were not Jewish. They were not Jewish.
And the orphanage you were sent to wasn't a Jewish orphanage?
Pardon, sorry?
The orphanage you went to, was it a Jewish orphanage?
No, not to my knowledge. I've never heard that it was Jewish.
Okay.
No, it was in Watford. Some little while after that, there was a Quaker family by the name of Ponsford. And the Quakers were very, very good to the Jews at that time. And this Ponsford family owned a house on Canvey Island, it's called. And they said that my parents could use that home so that we could all be together.
That's amazing. That's
Yes.
wonderful.
Well, we were only there for a few months, but during that time if you imagine, here my parents led a kind of ordinary life. My father ran his own business, my mother was there with the children, everything was okay, and all of a sudden transported to a country where you know not a soul, you don't speak the language, and you're still having to look after your children. It must have been quite traumatic. They never really spoke about it, not at all. Only in the 50s, my father went to France. He had a niece living in France, whose mother was his sister, his older sister, and she had been in the camps, and she subsequently made Aliyah. And when he saw the number,
it was tattooed on
the tattoo, her number, he was, well, you can imagine what it was. And when he came home, that's when he started to tell the story a bit. But their attitude at that time was very much, we don't want the children to, to have nightmares, to this and that, we're in England now, we're safe. And in fact, they really never spoke German at home. They preferred to speak in Yiddish because they said, England is at war with Germany and we don't want to look as though we're, the other side kind of thing. Yeah. After we came back from Canvey Island.
Why did you have to leave?
We had to leave because war was then declared.
Oh, okay.
And all aliens, whether they were friendly or not friendly, had to leave the big cities. The children were sent to Paignton in South Devon. And my parents said, well, if the children are going to be in Devon, we need to be in Devon in order that we can see them. They were going to be fostered there. Again, not Jewish, not in Jewish homes, no. So that's what happened. I, at that time, stayed with my parents. And gradually, oh yes, the most stupid part of everything was my father was enlisted in the British Army.
Wow.
Now, can you imagine anything? He was in the Pioneer Corps. To take somebody who hardly, probably could speak a bit of English by then, but hardly could, who had responsibility for 4 children, and by then a baby had been born, and he was whisked off to the Pioneer Corps.
And how old was he at this time?
He was mid-40s. Just doesn't make any sense to me at all, that, quite honestly. But anyway, that's how it was. So my mother was therefore completely on her own. She used to give some language lessons to two teachers in my primary school, and they became very close friends of hers. And when the baby was born, I mean, obviously the baby was not planned, but the baby was born, they were very helpful in providing equipment and generally helping her. And gradually, after my father came out of the army, he was released on health conditions eventually. And he looked around. He would do any work that was available for him. He worked as a hotel porter in this hotel and that hotel, very menial jobs just in order to make a living. And he worked by night and by day. And gradually things improved a little bit. And
they kept religious, they kept kosher, they kept religious.
Absolutely.
Even under these difficult conditions.
Yes. During the war years, by then we had moved to Torquay, which is, you perhaps haven't heard of those places. Torquay is known as the Queen of the English Riviera. Actually, David Marriott was born in Torquay. During the war years, we had a wonderful Jewish community. Before then, there wasn't actually a community as such. There was a sprinkling of Jewish people. But during the war years, a lot of Sephardi Jews came down from Stamford Hill Orthodox area in London. And they came with their carpets. They were nearly all in the carpet industry. Came with their carpets. I remember we used to be invited to tea there. And you'd see these rolls and rolls of wonderful carpets in the rooms, being stacked there.
And Rene, can I ask, what was your first recollection? You were a baby when you were taken to England. Do you remember one of the very first recollections that you
One
ever
of
had?
the first things I remember, I was 3. And I suffered with rheumatism as a child, and I think I was in quite a bit of pain, and my mother said, look, I'm not sending you to kindergarten today. you can go, we'll go out for a walk. And she put me in the pushchair, and as we were walking along, we bumped into my teacher, who said, come along, you're coming to school. Now, quite what I remember and what is hearsay, because the two become very mixed up, really. Yeah. I really always felt secure. I remember nothing of being in the in the orphanage. I wasn't there for that long, but I don't remember it at all. I certainly remember when my baby brother was born, which was I was 4.5 by then. I remember he slept in a kind of drawer, you know, fitted it out with blankets. I felt secure. I had my parents with me, and as I say, they were forward-looking. They were not constantly bemoaning their fate or something like that. To the contrary, they realized that they had, you know, they'd witnessed a miracle.
Can I ask, really, what happened to your parents' siblings or their family that were left behind in Poland and Germany?
Yeah.
Did they know what was happening, or did they manage to escape as well?
Did they know what was happening?
Did your parents know it was happening back in Germany and Poland during the war?
Actually, what happened was my mother's parents at the time of this lived in Switzerland.
Your mother's side was from Switzerland.
My mother was, yes, from Switzerland. And so my mother got in touch with the Swiss authorities, I think from the camp, when we were in Sponsheen refugee camp, got in touch with the Swiss authorities to see, you know, can we come to Switzerland? Switzerland said, we're willing to take you and the 4 children, but not your husband.
Unbelievable.
Can you imagine it?
Incredible.
I mean, it's not as though my father would have been any burden on the Swiss nation, because he spoke German, and in Zurich, where they came from, is German speaking. He had his own business, he knew how to run a business.
And they refused.
And my mother said, where my father is, so I am, that kind of thing.
Wow.
We've often wondered, my siblings and I, would we have agreed, would we have said, well, look, we'll save the children, in which case, I mean, my father would certainly have perished, I'm sure. But it was quite a brave decision to say, no, I'm sticking to the family, and you know, my mother's decision. Now, she had a sister who at that time worked for the Red Cross. She lived in Palestine, as it then was.
Under the British mandate, yeah.
Yes. And my father was, his older sister was taken to camp. She lived in France. The family were hidden behind an open fireplace. But his sister was taken to a camp. I'm not sure which camp she was in. It wasn't Auschwitz. But anyway, she survived. His younger sister made Aliyah again to Palestine, and actually she was one of the founder members of Kibbutz Hazoreah near Haifa.
This is before 39.
That was yes, that was in 33, 34.
Long before.
Then he had a brother who also was in Palestine, had come to Palestine round about then, and an older brother who went to America. Oh, and the younger brother, that's right, the younger brother was in France, and he was killed in France, yeah.
And his parents?
His parents had already died. They died young, yes.
So your family, I think it's pretty unique. That a whole family was taken on the Kindertransport.
Yes, yes. And it was only because, well, really, it was because I was a baby and they were hell-bent on saving children. And the coincidence of sponsorship coming up for my parents at the same time, and presumably the fact that there was room on the ship sailing, that it all sort of got together, because they didn't make a habit of taking parents, not at all.
In fact, Rene, I heard that the madrichim, the people that helped with bringing the children to England, if they were over, I don't know if the age was 16 or 17, they were sent back.
Yes, exactly. 17 was the cut-off date for Kindertransport. Yes. Yeah.
Do you know any other families where entire families were taken on the Kindertransport?
And I have many books here. In all of them, we're quoted as being the only family. The only family. Yes.
It's really remarkable.
Yes.
So your family, during the war, you all stayed together in...
Yes, eventually my parents were renting properties. Each time when the situation got a bit better, they rented something a bit better. And by the time we came together, the whole family was in 42. About 43, 44, we were all living together then. After the war, the largely Persian Sephardi community went back to London, and that's when my father became very active. They didn't have a rabbi at that time, and he acted as kind of lay rabbi because he was learned, my father. And he also used to run the cheder for the children until the congregation gradually increased, and then we did appoint a rabbi. Yes.
And then you grew up?
I spent my whole life until I was 18 in Torquay. I mean, it was a wonderful place, really, to grow up in. It was very much like Netanya, but without the Jews. I stayed there until I was 18. It was fairly obvious that if you were trying to avoid intermarriage, you needed really to get out of Torquay eventually. And my older sister, she was a trail setter. She went to live in London to stay at the aunt of a school friend of hers, who was not Jewish, but who had rooms, which she could rent. So she came to London first and got herself a job and what have you. And then a couple of years later, the next in line did the same, round about the same time as my brother did. And I only came to London when I was 18 because I studied languages here in London at the French Institute. And that left my brother, the young brother, in England, and we were all in London. The three sisters, we rented a couple of bedrooms and a lounge, and gradually we had a sort of more or less flat. People used to say, "Oh, you're so lucky, you have no restrictions." And I used to think, if only I had restrictions.
Wow.
They all came home, they all had a meal, and we had to then start making a meal. Their washing was all done, and we had to do all that. I was envious of them, and they were envious of me.
Did your parents and your brother join you eventually?
No. Well, sadly, my brother died when he was 18.
I'm sorry to hear.
What happened in his case, he suffered with bronchitis as a baby, and gradually, when he was growing up, asthma. He was 18. He had places at 3 universities he was going to, and he had an asthma attack. They called the ambulance, and the ambulance came. They brought up the oxygen cylinders. Each one was empty.
Aye.
And en route to hospital.
I'm sorry to hear this. That must have been devastating for the whole family.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow, that's your story is so unique and so unbelievable.
Yeah.
Did your family stay in touch with other Kindertransport?
No, do you know what? We didn't, because in Torquay, we were the only refugee family. We were known as the refugee family. Actually, I'll tell you a story about refugee family. When it was my brother's bar mitzvah, the older brother's bar mitzvah, the community there, the Sfardim, they were wonderful, and they said, don't worry about the bar mitzvah, we will arrange a very nice kiddush. In those days, quite honestly, they didn't have mega events for bar mitzvahs. You had a kiddush in shul, and that was bar mitzvah, very nice. So he did his parasha, and there was a very nice kiddush laid on and funded by by the Persian community. The Ladies' Guild came to my mother and said, before the bar mitzvah, and said, we are going to pay for a suit. That was normally the first time that the boys had a suit, long trousers and all this. You're to go to such and such a shop, Jewish-owned shop, I won't mention the name, Jewish-owned shop, and they know you're coming, and you'll choose a suit for him, and wonderful, So when the time came, my mother took my brother Henry. He was called Heinrich when he was in Germany, but he became Henry. And they went into the shop, and she said to the assistant there, I've come from Mrs. whatever it is. And the assistant called right across the shop to another assistant, it's the lady who's come for the charity suit. My mother said, Henry, took his hand and walked out to the shop.
You were very proud.
Very. Yeah. Yes. And rightfully so.
Rightfully so.
Doesn't it just show that my mother always used to say, if you haven't got anything nice to say, then don't speak at all. But would you shout such a thing? Would you?
It's embarrassing.
How insensitive can you be?
Extremely. Can I ask, how did the non-Jewish community view your family as?
The non-Jewish
community in Turkey or in England when
non-Jews, you're talking.
When people found out that you were from the Kindertransport, did you have a very positive response?
We didn't really mention very much at all. People used to ask, well, they knew we weren't English, obviously. My parents spoke with an accent. People used to say, where were you born? I wouldn't say I was born in Germany. I used to say I was born just outside Switzerland, and they all fell for that.
Interesting, clever thing to say.
They couldn't go and Google it in those times. But people used to say to me, even when I was at grammar school age, say something in German, say something in German. I used to say something, and they were, wow, But,
and you never experienced anti-Semitism growing up as a child?
No, I never did. My brother did. A in school. He had a slight accent. When he said the letter R, it was guttural. To this day, it still is, actually. Well, don't forget, I mean, he went to school in Germany. I don't know whether boys are more into that than girls, or whether he was more of a target, because he was quite a nervous child growing up. But then on the other hand, he'd seen German tanks rolling down the streets. In fact, he ended up with a broken leg at one point, because he was always into doing foolish, when I say foolish things, pranks. And he said to my sister, evidently, "Watch me, I can swing on the end of that tank." And he swung on the end of the tank and of course fell off and broke his leg.
Right.
But he always says he remembers clearly these German soldiers came up to him. I mean, they could have done anything to him, but they were kind to him. They helped him, and I don't know whether they called an ambulance or called my parents, I don't know. But yes, so he did come across anti-Semitism. I don't think any of us other three girls, I don't think we did at all. But we weren't, because we were a family of 7. That was a big family in England in those days, you know, a very big family. The non-Jews thought we were a wonderful family because my mother used to dress us nicely, not expensively, but you know, and we had curly hair and we were dark and they were blonde and straight hair and this kind of thing. So, you know, we were different. My father built up his own business even whilst he was working in hotels, and he gradually built up a kind of tally business where he would go knocking on doors with books of what they could buy and pay off with very minimal amounts. And they all liked him. Well, he had a very friendly disposition. But there were some, when he came, they used to call up, "Mum, the Jew man is here."
Wow.
But they didn't actually mean it nastily.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's what he was. He was Jewish and he was the man, and he was coming to, you know, to get yet another 5 shillings in those days was more or less what they did to pay off what they owned. Oh, there was, mind you, yes, there was a case of anti-Semitism again. I remember being with my mother. I don't know if any of my siblings were. I think it was just me with her. And we were in a very nice grocery shop. I mean, it was way before the times of supermarkets and stuff like that. And we were waiting in line to be served. You had to be served with everything. You didn't pull it off the shelves. And somebody must have heard her accent and said to her, "Go back to the country where you were born." Well, they didn't realise, you know, that would have been Switzerland, but just the same, what they meant was, "Get out, Jew." That's what they meant. Yeah, that I do remember. Yeah, so we left the shop.
And can I ask, Rene, when did your family, or when did you start speaking about being a Kindertransport? Or was it always part of
I tell you,
up?
when a little bit it was, but it was very minimal. It was very minimal. I remember when I was growing up, I had a kind of real appetite for reading all about the Holocaust. And my father used to come along. I mean, I'm talking, I would be perhaps about 14 or something like that. And he'd see what I was reading, and he would say, "No, you don't want to read about that. It'll only upset you."
It
used
was,
to say.
that was the view of many survivors.
Yes. Now, in 1989, am I right? 89? Yes, 89. Bertha Leviton, have you heard of her? She was instrumental in setting up the reunion, 50th anniversary reunion of Kindertransport. And after that time is when people started to talk.
Did you
much
attend the 50th anniversary?
I was in hospital at the time, so I couldn't go. But what happened was, a few months before then, I remember I was sitting in our garden reading, and I had the radio beside me, and there was a program every day at 2 o'clock. It was called Woman's Hour, and they used to have some really interesting speakers. And they had this Bertha Leviton, and she was going to be setting up this 50th anniversary, and she was saying all about it. And I heard it, and I immediately rang my brother. I said, listen, Henry, you've got to get yourself involved in this. Because my brother was working for Kodak at the time. He was always into films and cameras and stuff like that. And he helped Bertha a great deal with regard to having to photocopy a million things. Again, it was before emails and, you know, everything so easy with the computer sending here and there and the other. So I got him involved, and he became very involved with Bertha Leviton, and she with our whole family.
And that reunion was held in England?
Yes, held in London.
And I think it was very well attended.
It was very well attended, yes, it was. It was, yeah.
And subsequently, have you been to any other reunions?
Well, after that was.
Or have they held any?
I think they held a few. There was one in Australia which my sister hosted at the time of the 50th for Australian Jews, because actually Australia had more Holocaust survivors than any other country.
That's true, yeah.
Probably other than Israel, I mean.
Yeah, outside Israel, I think Australia had, outside Israel, yeah.
Yes. No, so I didn't go. You see, we felt a bit different because, well, I certainly did feel different because everybody else was talking about, well, I lived here and I went to this school and
you had your parents.
And
yeah.
I kind of felt a bit of a fraud almost when it came to stories.
It's not a fraud, but I think you had the great fortune and the great muzzle that your parents were with you,
Yes.
which is very unique.
Yes. In fact, when we made Aliyah, soon after we made Aliyah, I joined a local Wheatso group, and very soon, I think I'd been there about 2 meetings or something, and because in England I was very involved with Wheatso, chairman at one point of our local group and what have you, so the obvious thing is when I come here. But it was run very differently. Anyway, whatever. So they said, oh, we have kind of lunches with speakers and, you know, would you tell your story? And I said, you know what? I won't, because in Israel specifically, there are so many horrendous stories that I kind of felt I would be trying to grab the limelight of something which was so awful. That's how I felt. Now it's a little bit different, firstly because there are fewer and fewer survivors who can tell a story. Either there are survivors who unfortunately, you know, their memories have gone or whatever.
They're fading, unfortunately, with age. Yeah.
Yes. So, as I say, those people who were brought up in London, there were little groups of them a lot of them lived, do you know London at all?
Sure.
A lot of them lived in Hampstead and Belsize Park and all this kind of thing. They all spoke German to each other. I mean, you know, their English was really very poor.
Golders Green is Munchel.
Yes, that's
German.
right, that's right. On the one hand, they had the huge advantage they'd lost family, but they had each other. Whereas we, down in Torquay in Devon, we just had to get on with it, and so we did get on with it. And we didn't really, my parents used to say, you don't need to go visiting school friends, but you've got each other. We always had someone to play with because we were 5.
Yeah.
So we didn't need, you know, it's not like we were an only child and that would have been very important. And we had no cousins. I mean, I didn't know what an aunt or an uncle was, more or less. When people used to speak, oh, my auntie this and my uncle the other and my cousins. We had nobody in England, nobody at all. First time I came across an aunt was when my mother's sister came from, well, it was by then Israel, and came to stay with us. And that was the first time. And then, you know, after that, of course, we gradually got connected more to my father's side of the family. Well, because there were more of them. And, you know, to this day, obviously, we're very connected with them.
And Rene, have you kept in touch with other Kindertransport survivors? Do you feel a closeness?
Yes, you do. You do.
It's like
Even
a family?
Well, to be honest, anyone who is Jewish and comes from Germany, I feel immediate rapport. Firstly, I can speak German, so I feel a rapport. Actually, there was one occasion in Hampstead. There's the most beautiful area called Kenwood. It's got a huge how would you describe Kenwood, Jerry? The house, I mean.
Oh, it was a big country house.
Yes, country house. It was used a lot as settings for various films, national films. Had the most magnificent grounds imaginable, and we used to spend half our weekend there. We just loved walking around the grounds. Absolutely beautiful. It's the place I miss the most of England. I don't really miss England, but I do miss Kenwood. And one day we were walking along, we'd done a considerable walk, and there were seats dotted everywhere. And there was a couple sitting there with a dog on a blanket on the floor. And it was a, you know, cute dog. And we said, oh, cute dog kind of thing, we said to the people. And they said, oh yes, you know, sit down, there's room on our bench. So we sat there. And the woman had a foreign accent. And she was saying, do you live here? And I said, yes. And where are you from? And she said, Poland. Oh, she said, have you ever been to Poland? She asked me. I said, well, I have, but I'll tell you in a moment. I said, where are you from? You'll never guess where she was from. She was from Sponsheen, which is where the refugee camp was. I mean, I've come across a million people, they've never heard of Sponsheen unless they've delved into history of that kind of thing. I said, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't Jewish, of course. I said, Sponsheen. I said, I was in a Jewish refugee camp there. I said, you knew about Jewish? No, she knew nothing. Well, did she or didn't she? Who knows?
What are the chances of that happening? Wow.
the chances
It's
of that.
unbelievable.
It really was. Actually, they were a pleasant couple, weren't they? He wasn't Polish. Pleasant. And I told her the story because I thought if she doesn't know it, she better know it.
And how did she react?
Yeah, well, really, oh my goodness, no, we knew nothing of that.
And have you ever been back to Germany
No.
and Poland?
Poland, no.
Would you ever go?
Have I ever been, do you say?
Or would you ever go?
The times that Jerry actually has always wanted to do the, not the March of the Living, but, the visiting of the camps.
Yeah.
I could never do it. I'm somebody who, even when I visit graves, I have to be on my own. Well, I mean, Jerry, but I can't be, I don't want to be with lots of people. I feel I couldn't, I might be wrong, because a lot of people have been, and my brother has been, for example. I wouldn't want to see the emotions of other people when I myself have got my... Do you understand what I'm saying?
Actually, do. When we went to Poland last year, I do understand what you're saying, because it's a very private time, and you with other people as well. So it's a very difficult emotionally.
Yes, yes. Germany, as a matter of fact, I nearly broke my vow of never going back to Germany. There's one part of me would love to go back because Freiburg is supposed to be a most beautiful city. Actually, some years ago, our son, who's professor of gastroenterology in America, was invited to a conference which was going to be taking place in Freiburg, and he was a guest speaker. So he started off his talk saying, thank you very much for inviting me, this, that, and that. My mother was born in your beautiful city, but she left in 1939 and just left it at that. And subsequently, and he actually went to visit our house, and he sent all photos. You could see where the mezuzahs had been. It was owned now, owned, living in the house was a pediatrician and his wife, by chance, also medics. When he got back to America, he wrote this letter to the organizer, again thanking him for allowing him to come and And he then told the story. And the organizer sent a book for me, a book of Freiburg, and he also sent his story. He was taken prisoner by the British, and I mean it was actually very interesting because there is another story, there is another side, not Nazis, but I mean, to the ordinary German, and there were ordinary Germans. So, that was quite something. But about a year and a half ago, we got an invitation. It was not directly sent to us, it was through somebody who we knew, who used to travel to Germany a lot and teach in schools about what happened to her and her family. She'd received this invitation, and it was talking about, have you heard of Stolpersteine? they're like the plaques.
The brass. Sure.
Yeah, Stolpersteine they're called. Stumbling stones. Yes.
They have it in Vienna. They've got it now in Slovenia, in Ljubljana.
Yeah.
And in Germany, in many of the towns,
Well, Freiburg was going to be having them. And so we were invited she received this invitation, and there was a list of the houses, and one of the houses was our house. Well, when I saw that, I can't tell you, I went absolutely cold. I said to Jerry, I have to go, and you have to come with me, because I no way can be there on my own. And my kids got very excited. Stephen in America, yes, you must go. And Nikki here, yes, you must go, and you must go, and you must go. Then I looked at the dates. When was it going to be? Firstly, I was looking, yes, at the date. The date that it was going to be our house was it actually Erev? I think it was Erev Shmini Atzeret, the Erev, and it was going to be in the afternoon, which meant that I couldn't travel back then, and I'd already been looking up through was it EasyJet? There was an airline.
But it didn't work out. It wouldn't have worked out.
Pardon?
It wouldn't have coincided.
They had planned this thing on dates unsuitable for Jewish people who were even vaguely interested in keeping the Chagim.
But Rene, would you, even today, if they've got the sign, wouldn't it be significant if you went and you saw the house with the...
Well, in fact, what happened, I wrote to the organiser and I said, I very much would have wanted to come, but, you've made it kind of difficult by,
And they couldn't change it?
I'm surprised, it was too late to change it. I said, I'm surprised that you didn't contact a rabbi in Freiburg to check the dates. He obviously was not very keen on my pointing out this error. He said, well, the dates were decided, a couple of years ago, and so, this. I said, well, I wonder whether you'd be so kind as to take some photos and email them to me at the ceremony. I never heard another word. So I was pretty angry, really, about this. Why wouldn't you answer and say, yes, I will try to, or something? So I thought, you know what? Any money, I bet that there's a Chabad in Freiburg.
Sure.
So I start looking up on the computer, Chabad, Freiburg, and sure enough, I find that they do have. So, and it gave his phone number, not his email address, did it? I think there must have been an email address, because I think I first contacted him by email, telling him, that this and that and that and this, and I wonder whether at his convenience he would mind going and taking photographs of the Stolpersteine. Within about half a minute, I got a reply saying, wow, and of course, it'd be my pleasure, and da-da-da, and na-na-na, and if ever you do come to Germany, I'd so love you to come and speak in our shul, and all the rest of it. At the time when I was getting really excited about, yes, I was going, my brother in England, he decided he would come, my sister in Australia said she will come, my sister in Jerusalem said, no, she won't come. My nephew, he was going to come, so it was going to be quite a kind of contingent topic. But in the end, as I say, it didn't happen. One thing with the Stolpersteiner which I'm not keen on, because I've always felt in Germany, and the more so now in the whole of Europe, that there are people who will see this and who will walk over it on purpose.
You could have put it.
Exactly what I think they should have
in
done.
the wall.
Should have done.
I see it often on the street, and people do walk over.
Yes, if they walk over it by accident is one thing, but if they're going to spit on it and say Jews should have killed more, which is what we're seeing in Germany, aren't we? So,
But I have seen in Vienna where they've put them.
oh, in Vienna they've put them
some,
on the wall. Oh,
on the
really?
wall. So there are some that's on
Oh,
the wall as well,
really?
and it's much more significant. Because
Well, of course it catches the eye.
Sure.
Yes.
And the other
I've got a photocopy of the that the Chabad sent me. In fact, he apologized because it took him about 3-4 days. He said, "I'm so sorry," he said, "because the weather has been atrocious." And he said, and even today it was still raining very hard, but I couldn't bear to wait another day. You know, that's when...
But the organisers never replied to you, and they never sent you a photograph.
No,
Amazing.
not another word. I mean, I found that unbelievable. Unbelievable. Oh, another coincidental thing. Our grandson from America took a gap year last year and travelled everywhere. He came here twice, but I mean, he travelled everywhere. And when he was in India, he met this couple who were kind of his parents' age, and they were from Germany. So he said, "Oh, whereabouts in Germany are you?" Where were they from? Freiburg. Where did they live? So straight away I got a WhatsApp, "Please send me your address." I sent the address. They lived round the corner. They weren't Jewish.
But incredible.
And they said, "We will send you photos." And immediately they sent to Jacob, who then, WhatsApped to us photos of the outside of the house and with the Stolpersteiner, and yeah.
It's amazing. Rene, can I ask, I know this is a difficult question, but reflecting on the Kindertransport and the whole history of the Kindertransport, how is your feeling or your family's feeling about, I know it's a difficult question, but
Non-Jewish.
that the Jewish community, not that times were difficult and it's very easy to judge, but a lot of the children didn't even have the option that they could go to a Jewish family,
Yes.
and they landed up in non-Jewish families. And there's an estimate that 1/3 of all the Kindertransport are lost to Judaism because they didn't even know that they had Jewish ancestors or that their parents were
That's
Jewish.
right. That's right. Well, we did always speak about it, once we were speaking, and we used to say, so and so part of our community, how comes that they didn't take in a Jewish child? And how comes that this one didn't take in a Jewish child? And we just found it quite extraordinary. I think with non-Jewish, I know where my siblings were taken in, they incidentally, they were well aware that these were Jewish children, and they used to go to Cheder and to Shul. But I think anyone who had, say, 3 bedrooms and didn't have large families, then they were paid something by the government. So maybe, I don't know if they were forced to take in people, or maybe the thought of, well, it'll add to their income a bit and times were hard. I don't know how on earth a Jewish family couldn't have taken in a Jewish child. I know this is quite different but it still reflects a little bit. When I was 16, I think I was, 15 or 16, my father saw in the National Jewish Chronicle, it was a Jewish paper of England, there was an advertisement, and it said, "We're seeking families to give a holiday, take in a Jewish orphan from Norwood." Norwood was a big Jewish orphanage. And my father saw this. He must have spoken to my mother about it, but he certainly said nothing at all to me about it. I was the only one at home apart from my younger brother. And he suddenly announced, "By the way, we're going to be having,"
Sure.
Eva, she was called, Eva Rottenberg. Eva Rottenberg is going to come in 2 weeks' time. She's coming here for 2 weeks on holiday. It was about 2 weeks or 3 weeks before very important exams at school, like pre-matric exams, and I was a studious person, so oh my goodness me, what timing. But anyway, A, I had no choice, and B, I wouldn't have said, I don't think even I would have said, "No, you can't bring her." I might have said, "Can't she come later," or something. So she came, and actually we got on very nicely. She was a very nice girl. And then after 2 weeks, probably, I mean, you know, she might never have had a holiday. Not that we had holidays. My father used to say, "You live in Torquay, who needs a holiday? We live by the sea." Anyway, we couldn't afford it. But I mean, it was true. It was living by the sea, not living in some city or other with, you know. But, so what I'm saying is, had we been Jewish family in England, and there is absolutely no doubt with 5 children that my parents would I know for sure. I know for sure. And I can't understand. I don't know how they could have. Maybe they made individual excuses to themselves not to
It's
take
difficult because
somebody in.
you hear stories where children were brought up and they remained non-Jewish. They didn't even know that they were.
Yes, exactly.
They lost their connection
and
with
some
Judaism.
some of them, when a parent or both parents managed to survive and they came over, they didn't want to go back with these parents because they'd lived such a non-Jewish life. They'd seen these people who were totally strangers to them. I mean, horrific tales. Yeah.
Can I ask, has your story been related in any of the books?
Oh yeah, in all these 3 books.
Is it?
This was the first one.
And this one's called, this is a story of...
This is called And the Policeman Smiled, because one of the children evidently couldn't get over the fact that in England policemen smile.
This is...
This one here.
Oh, could you possibly just read just the introduction?
Oh,
This is from And the Policeman Smiled.
this is from And the Policeman Smiled by Barry Turner. The only complete family to come over on a Kindertransport was the Alperns, Leo and Adele, and their children, Heinrich, Anita, Sonja, and Irena. They came from Freiburg, where Leo was a credit draper. Like other Polish Jews, he was arrested in October 38, but Adele and the 4 children ended up at Sponsheen, with him, should say. 3 months later, the 3 older children were told they could go to Britain. A week after they left to join a transport at Warsaw, permission came through for their parents to follow them for domestic service. By sheer coincidence, the family was reunited on the boat train and sailed together on the Warszawa, which docked at Cotton Wharf near London Bridge on 15th of February 39. Having made it, that family was split up for more than a year, but was reunited after the Blitz and eventually settled in Torquay. Yes, that's that one.
Wow,
Then there's this one.
Memories that won't go away.
Memories That Won't Go Away by Michelle Gold. This is done as sort of my story. Rene Moss, née Irene Alpen. Rene and her family's story is quite unique. They were the only complete family, children together with parents, to arrive in England via a Kindertransport. She and her family lived in Freiburg, Germany. Although her father was born in Berlin, they had Polish citizenship, not German. As a result, in October 38, her father, together with all Polish Jewish men, were arrested and imprisoned overnight. The following day, all Polish Jews living in Germany had to leave their homes. They spent 4 months in Sponshin refugee camp on the borders of Germany and Poland before being contacted by the Kindertransport. Initially, room was found for her 3 elder siblings on a Kindertransport ship that was sailing from the Polish port of Gdynia. A little later, the authorities accepted Rene, who was a baby of just 20 months old, and her parents. Miraculously, they all sailed on the same ship, the SS Warszawa.
And does it have a picture?
And then, now, this picture, although I've got a better one of it here, that's as we arrived.
Oh, that's amazing. That's incredible. That's the Rene and the family arriving in England on February the 15th, 1939. The photo appeared in several British newspapers. And this is you as a...
This actually is my 3-year-old. This is Sonia.
Wow.
This is her. This is her, and that's me.
This is, I'll just take this picture over here. So this is...
This...
And the person holding that
is Lord Lansbury. He was philanthropist, famous philanthropist in England. And there's a picture of us with him, and it had a caption saying, "This is not merely a picture of youth and age, it is one of love and suffering." The 2 little kiddies Mr. George Lansbury, he later became a lord, has on his knees are 2 of the 54 refugee children who arrived in London from no man's land in Sponshin last week. The younger child is still afraid, even of the photographer.
And that was you?
That was me.
Wow.
And not even Mr. Lansbury, who has gained the respect of the world for his humanitarianism, can yet make the other one smile.
You can see this, then it's, your sister's not smiling. Wow.
In this book, they do it all as trains. I mean, we arrived by boat, train to the boat. And there was an exhibition in Los Angeles a few years ago, and they put the picture of our family as the head of this particular train. It's that same photo as when we arrived.
Wow. And then there's another book, 10,000 Children
That Hitler Missed, by Laurie Greschler.
And that's a very...
Again, that's that picture.
It's a very famous picture. So this picture was taken as you arrived in England, February 15, 1939. Wow, that's amazing.
I can't imagine how marvellous my mother looks. I mean, what she must only have been thinking.
They were only going to a foreign land, a foreign language.
Yeah.
The total unknown. Wow, the Alpen family, twist of fate.
Yeah. Do you want this one?
A little bit, if possible.
The Alpen family grew up in the Black Forest region of Germany and shared a prosperous life. In the fall of 1938, Poland passed a law that required all Polish Jews living abroad for more than 5 years to return to Poland to have their passports stamped. The stamping had to be carried out by a certain date, within 2 weeks, or the bearer would lose citizenship. The Nazis realized that Germany would be filled with thousands of stateless Jews. In response, they forcibly sent the Polish Jews out of Germany and back into Poland, where their passports originated. Roughly 15,000 Jews were arrested and sent to the Polish border. Upon arrival, the Polish government rejected their admittance, and they were stuck in a country that no longer recognized them as citizens. The Alpen family was one of the 15,000 stateless Jews. With only a small amount of money and 1 suitcase each, the family was left with 4 children to support in the middle of nowhere. They walked to the small town of Sponheim on the border between Poland and Germany. They lived in a refugee camp, but the conditions were inhumane and many could not endure the conditions. Some died, others committed suicide. And then it goes on a bit. I mean, it goes on quite a bit, but I mean, it's basically saying, oh, that's right, because my grandmother in Switzerland, she wrote to her sister who lived in Poland, asking if we could go there from the camp. And her sister said, you know, I'm sorry, but I mean, our situation is so bad here in Poland that we can scarcely manage. Anyway, she sent a couple of cooked chickens to the camp. But I mean, had we gone there, we would have perished with them.
Absolutely.
So, you know, it's all fate, isn't it, really?
And with all this, your faith, it's never diminished.
No. Our faith.
Your family's faith, you remained.
No.
Even when you heard of what happened to the rest of your father's family in Germany.
Well, you know, I mean, my father was brought up in an Orthodox family. Now, his sister, who became a founder member of Kibbutz Hazoreah, she said to me, because she became then, I mean, it was not an Orthodox kibbutz, quite the opposite actually. I mean, it was a wonderful kibbutz. And the first time I met her, she said, you know, I was brought up this way until she was about 18 when she came to Palestine, as it was. And she said, what I saw and what I heard, she said, I can no longer, I just cannot believe anything anymore. So some people were affected that way. Other people were affected totally the other way. The founder of the Lanyardo Hospital, I don't know whether you know his story, he lost his entire family, and he was saved. And he said, well, obviously, if I'm saved, I intend to kind of make my life, as it were, really worthwhile. And that was how he set about setting up this hospital.
In Indiana. There was also a lot of Rosh Hashivas that lost their entire family,
Yeah.
and they came and they rebuilt
Clung
the
on.
yeshivas, yeah.
I suppose those that clung on to it, at least clung on to it. I met up with a friend of mine, whom I've known her since she was 2.5 or something. They used to live two doors away from us in England. She now lives in England, in America, but we've remained very connected. And she said, she came to visit us recently, and she said, oh, don't ask about the flight, Rene. The flight was horrendous. There was such turbulence. She said, I even dug out and I was reciting the Shema. You know, I mean, she still, she keeps a certain kashrut, her way kashrut, you know, keeps, celebrates all the chagim, this kind of thing. But she no way pretends to be more than that. And she said, it's the first thing. So deep down inside anyone who's had any kind of background, it's there, isn't it?
It is. Well, Rene, I just want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, really. Your story is so inspirational, and what you and your family experienced, it is unique, it's, as it says in the books. And it's just such a wonderful thing to see that you're so positive, and I mean, you went through such a trauma, but look how...
Well, I mean, I consider that I was really probably the luckiest, because being the youngest, then I remembered less. Not only that, when we were growing up, we were more established. My father's business was more established, so I had better opportunities, probably.
You had a family. You had a family which, unfortunately, all the others,
Oh,
up
yes.
to 10,000 children,
Absolutely.
they didn't have parents.
Yes, that's my father's family.
You can see a very distinguished...
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. Well,
That's my father. I always point him out as the best looking.
it's a very, you can see a very orthodox, a very special family. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, she's the one, the founder member of the kibbutz. And this one is the one who was killed in France. He came to live in England, in Israel, and he became a chazan in America.
Rene, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
I'll just show you the one other thing. This was, yes, the Kindertransport, round about time of the Kindertransport reunion. That's my brother. That's my sister from Australia. And that's me. And that's my mum. My father had died by then. And my sister had come on a visit. And I'd just come out of hospital.
And this was the 50th reunion. This is time of the 50th reunion.
Yes, round about 89, just after 89. Because they were doing all stories, the Alpen family are thought to be the only refugee family that arrived here as a complete unit with a Kindertransport. This was in the Jewish Chronicle, the Jewish paper. But, yes. We look a lot happier there.
Really, thank you so much. And
Well,
it's
thank
so
you for
greatly
your
appreciated.
You've got some interesting documents in there.
Yes, there are.
Actually, that the
This is not actually I don't think, German-Polish frontier. It could have been oh yes, it must have been.
what?
Disembarking from the SS Warsaw. I don't know where we were. Well, we could have been anywhere. That could have been, couldn't it?
It's very possible. And this is from the Times, 1939, February the 16th.
Yes. That was the following day. This is the visa which we received in the camp. It actually had an address, look, a road.
In Poland.
Yes.
This is real history. This is
Yes. My mother's Polish passport.
Naturalisation papers and
Yet
German
further
birth
on, this is
certificate.
my
Your
birth
certificate.
certificate.
your German birth certificate.
This, I happened to read a book at one time and I came across a load of information all about Spongine. This was a soup kitchen, I mean, if you can imagine. It's a funny thing, you know, now, especially in Israel, well, everywhere probably, but especially in Israel, there are lots of places where you can buy ready-made food. And I always say to Jay, I don't like going into I feel as though I'm in a soup kitchen. I mean, I've got no memory of the soup kitchen, obviously,
But it must be
in my
embedded.
mind,
It must be embedded.
maybe
yeah.
somewhere there. Yeah. That was nationalisation. My mother's.
Rene, you must be very grateful to Britain for
Oh, absolutely.
this was a
Absolutely.
that was a story in the local paper in Torquay.
That was a story and a half. It wasn't really to do with
I'm
Kindertransport.
looking at your time.
Oh, I've got to go
Okay.
shortly.
well.
There was a story where my father, when things were getting really, really difficult, he gave in safekeeping a gold watch which he had to his non-Jewish neighbour and said, you know, can you look after this? I'm a bit worried, kind of thing. And they kept this watch, and then, you know, what happened. Years and years later, when was this? November the 10th. funny enough.
1960.
November the 10th, Kristallnacht, 1960. The grandson of the person traced my father to Torquay. I mean, how he did it, I don't know, without Google and everything else, and gave him back the watch.
That's such an amazing story.
Yeah.
And this is a picture of your father.
Story in
Leah.
the local newspaper.
Yeah.
That's
Wow, what
his
is,
father.
Yeah.
that's incredible.
I did a transcript of it. I mean, if you want some of the photocopies or something, I happily will always
Okay.
email them to you if you
Thank
feel
you so
you need.
much. Well, Rene, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Not at all.